I'm going to turn it over to our speaker for the afternoon, Dom Miartin. I hope that I pronounced it correctly after having a conversation with him. He is with Optus Bank. Optus Bank is a U.S. Treasury certified community development financial institution and the only black bank owned in South Carolina and one of 17 nationally. An immigrant from the former Czechoslovakia, Dominic moved to the U.S. at age 16. Before joining Optus, he spent 12 years as a senior executive officer at Southern Bancorp, most recently as the executive vice president. Please welcome your speaker for this afternoon, Mr. Dom Miartin.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question, and my talk today will be really dominated by lots of questions, so I would love to engage the audience. I would love to hear from you. My first question to you is, what do you think about when you see this image? What comes to your mind when you see the image? And feel free to shout it out. Great. I'll share what it means to me. So I'm an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 16 years old from former Czechoslovakia. And when I think about this, I think about the American dream. And to me, it is a symbol of the American dream. And I'm certainly living that dream today. But I also know that many people in America are not living that dream, or to them that dream is a nightmare. So I have a second question for you, is if you think about the concept of freedom, of economic opportunity, of the American dream, what do you think is the greatest predictor of one's ability to live it? Really meaning that moving up the ladder, being able to be better off than our parents were, making more money, having a better quality of life than the previous generation. What do you think that single greatest predictor, if you were to look at any person in every community, that person is going to be better off? Attitude, work ethic, grit. Any other? Zip code, race, gender, integrity. Keep going, this is great.
Being able to focus on thriving, not surviving.
Thriving. And so all of those are correlated, and I'm gonna with what I'm about to share with you. So part of my goal today is we're all here because we're probably seeking to improve our lives or the lives in our communities. I don't think we're here because we want to make more money or we want to just kill a day, right? We're here because we want to improve our life in some way. And so I'm going to let you read this and then react to it. And another fancy chart. Yep. Sorry. And by the way, you'll have access to these slides. My colleague Tracy will share with you a code to get them. Okay, so let me summarize what this means to me. What this means to me, and a lot of research over the last 60, 70 years has demonstrated that everything you shared was factually correct, but it was not the whole truth. And really, if you had to break down, those of us that are in a room that are maybe a little geeky, like science and like math, Pew Charitable Trust years ago analyzed it, and also Dalton Conley, the professor, looked at studies of 60 years of tax returns and did regression analysis on that. And yes, zip code, race, gender, education, all of those are highly correlated, but they're not the greatest driver. So imagine two families living side by side in the same zip code, on the same street in Columbia, South Carolina. Same house, parents have the same income, same education, same race, same ethnic background, same number of kids, but one family owns the house and the other family rents the house. So what the research shows that the family that owns the house is going to provide a better statistical chance to their children of making more money and having a better life than they are. And it's the simply ownership of the house. It has nothing to do with education directly, like we saw. There's correlation with that. So what's going on in America today? If you asked me before I started reading the research, as an immigrant coming to this country from a position of not necessarily extreme poverty, but when I left Czechoslovakia, my parents had a combined income of maybe $1,900 a year when I left in 1995. Clearly, I'm living the American dream today. But if you ask me, so how many children in America have access to that economic mobility? You can see today it's 50% or less. And then you could say next point you could make, well, America is the richest, greatest country in the world. So what if you can't move up the ladder? You're already high up. Why would you want to move up relative to your peers? Why are you trying to be just better than your peers? So then I started digging with some curiosity. Okay, so what is going on with the relative wealth? In other words, poverty, for example. And so you could say since 1970s, poverty in America has decreased. Everyone is better off than they were, and that's certainly true. But if you look at the number of people living below the federal poverty line, in most communities, that level is increasing. Everyone following that so far? Okay, so let's go a little deeper. So imagine if you grew up in a household that's in the bottom quintile, or the bottom 20%. Since 1973, your inflation-adjusted income would roughly be the same as it was, maybe a few percentage points higher. But folks at this conference, folks in this room, my guess is most of them are in the 95th percentile, right? It's a fair guess. If you're in this room, probably you're in the 95th percentile. So then you could say, well, so who cares? I'm doing great, right? I'm in the top 5% of the socioeconomic ladder in America. Since 1973, my income has risen almost 100%, adjusted for inflation. So I think I'm doing great, and I think America is doing great. I'm going to make an argument, maybe a little bit controversial, that I don't think that's the case. That collectively, we're leaving money on the table. Collectively, we're sabotaging our future and the future of our children. And let me show you why I would say such an outrageous thing. This is one of the many gaps that exist in America. So I'm going to focus on the racial wealth gap because of the mission, my personal mission, my family mission, and the mission of Optus Bank is to close the gaps that exist, particularly the racial wealth gaps or other gaps that exist in America. And our mission, and which is, I think, perfectly aligned with my family mission statement, is to make sure that every person in America has a chance to live a healthy and productive life. And the argument I'm making now, that's not the case today. Right? In America, as we learned, the net worth of your parents largely determines, statistically speaking, whether you have that chance to live a healthy and productive life, particularly, as we saw, if you're on a bottom quintile. Your chances of moving up the ladder, as was demonstrated here too, if you're born into the bottom quintile, you have over 70% chance that you're going to stay there. And this is in the greatest, most powerful country in the world, where we're living the economic dream that most immigrants like me want to experience. So let's go back to what's wrong with all that. Why do we care? Why is that a problem for us? It's a problem because we're leaving trillions of dollars worth of economic productivity on the table. That's trillions of dollars that would flow to everyone, particularly the top 5%, which is largely represented, my guess, in this room. So the argument I'm making is a moral argument, ethical argument. Why should we close the racial wealth gap? Why should we make sure that people that are simply born in a different circumstance should have, in the greatest, most powerful, richest country in the world, should have a chance to improve their life? Statistics show, and all the studies show, they don't. They simply don't have that. You could argue, you could poke holes in it, but the overarching and overwhelming predominant thought is that black and brown communities and certain other rural communities largely drive the economic opportunity for their people. It's just simply position of that person on that socioeconomic ladder. So the argument I want to make, though, is the economic argument. We're just hurting ourselves. If we were to close the racial wealth gap, for example, you can see there's various research studies, but there's trillions of dollars of wealth that would flow to everyone in this room, everyone on Main Street, and everyone on Wall Street too. So what do we need to do about it? Okay, so what's the solution? How do we do it without breaking into political arguments or debates? You know, what can every person in this room at this meeting today, what can we do to make sure that collectively our net worth, collectively our economic opportunity rises? So one solution that I've heard, and like I said, I'm certainly living it, right? If you ask me when I was a 16-year-old kid coming to America, I would say, well, I'm just going to work hard, be determined. We heard a lot of great words here: determination, grit, hard work, education, being smart, being competent, believing in self-determination. My birth country has one of the highest scores about self-determination, maybe even higher than America. We believe that we can do our own work and change our destiny. As Dr. King pointed out here, it's hard to pull yourself up by the bootstraps if you don't have any boots. So that's why I've committed our work and my work and at Optus Bank to maybe all we can do is finance those boots. If nothing else, at least we can provide a little capital to give someone those boots so they can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. But the reality is, we need to bust that myth of this self-made man, if you would. What do you think about this when you look at that? Any reactions? Just cold, unfiltered thoughts when you see this picture. What comes to mind? Money, rich, what else? Let's hear it. Lucky, love that, and I'll explain why. Okay. No comment. I'm sorry, say that again? There you go. Right there is what comes to my mind when I think about it. And I don't know, any of you follow former Labor Secretary Robert Reich? So he got in a big Twitter or X or whatever that thing is called today with Elon Musk, right? And he wrote some very interesting comments on Twitter about Elon Musk's father owning a mine in South Africa, and Bill Gates' mother being a executive and on a board of a Fortune company. And similarly, Jeff Bezos getting a small $300,000 loan from his parents to start Amazon. Right. My guess is that in this room today, there are people that are smarter, more hardworking, more determined, with better grit, better intellect, better integrity, all the words you said, than these three guys in this room right now. I would bet that there are folks in this room right now. What separates them from these three? Access, capital, opportunity, net worth. Yeah, networks. So I'm glad you're all paying attention to really my argument why we collectively can do more to make sure that there's more of these folks. And so I'm going to tell a story a little bit about one of our customers. I visited Sunyata in Washington, D.C. about a month ago, or maybe 6 weeks ago. She's one of the smartest, most hardworking people I ever met. Incredibly creative. If you Google her, look her up, she's very savvy on social media. I think she should be the next Bill Gates, right? I think she should be the next Jeff Bezos. I think she can be the next Elon Musk, not because of the money, but because of the productivity and because of the value that people like her, millions of people like her in America could create for the world if they were given the term I heard, capital. So part of my hope today is to share some ideas how I believe we can direct some of that capital so entrepreneurship, homeownership, and financial empowerment can be used as tools. Those are our tools at Optus Bank. Right? Those are the tools that we use because those are the tools as a bank we have available. But it boils down to exactly what several people said here. It's capital. And that capital has many forms, and I'll talk about the forms of capital that we all have that we can all deploy productively to make sure that there are millions of Sunyatas that are thriving in America. Not because by luck she found a black-owned bank in South Carolina that was able to do her loan while she couldn't even get a call back from one of the large banks that she'd been banking with for a decade. That's the mission of our bank. And also many folks in this room are business owners. You're entrepreneurs, and you're saying, well, this kind of sounds like charity, sounds like mission-driven work, right? What I'm talking about. So I also want to bust that myth. So kind of the theme of busting these myths. I want to bust that myth too. The idea is that these social enterprises, that these businesses that intentionally invest on Main Street, intentionally invest in high potential yet underestimated entrepreneurs like Sunyata, those are charities. They can't do quite well. They're not going to be competitive, right? Because you must be giving something up. If you're doing something extra, you must be giving something up. So I'm going to share with you kind of our story a little bit. Our bank is 102 years old. It was founded as Victory Savings Bank in Columbia, South Carolina by a group of very visionary and courageous African-American leaders, including Modjeska Simpkins. And the bank did extremely well for almost 100 years and then struggled through the recession and was recapitalized. When I joined the bank, it was about $47 million in assets. Today, we're about $490 million in assets 6 years later. We're also in one of the top 5% probably of most banks in terms of performance, asset quality. We're doing it while we're investing in high potential, underestimated people. And I'm convinced, maybe naively a little bit, I tend to have delusions of grandeur about what our little bank can do. But I believe one of the reasons we've been able to grow over 1,000% is because we are finding those gaps. We're finding the high potential underestimated people that are overlooked by others. It's not that they're worse credit risk. It's not that they have less opportunity to excel with the right support. It's simply others are overlooking them because they don't look like them, because they have other factors that may not fit the box of a traditional financial institution. A few years ago, a study was done, and it's been repeated several times, of secret shoppers going to large financial institutions with the identical loan packages. And the only thing that was changed on the loan package was the name and the person carrying that loan package in. And just take a wild guess what the response rate was if that person didn't look like me and maybe had a slightly more ethnic name than mine. It was a stunning difference. It was not 1 or 2%. I've seen a couple of studies, anywhere from 30 to 40% difference in response rates. Same credit package, same credit score, same qualifications. All that was different is how that person looked. And that's today in America. So part of my argument is that by leaning in and finding those gaps and saying we're going to break those myths down, we're not going to follow that pattern, can be very profitable, as you can see from the performance of Optus Bank. So we have a bank. Banks are typically very, very good at allocating capital to the highest and best uses, and those highest and best uses are frequently defined through the lens of systemic bias. So you're going to look at the highest and best uses, and typically communities that have high income, people that have high net worth, people that look like me, maybe sound a little bit better, maybe they don't have that Eastern Bloc accent that I have, maybe they don't have that weird spelled name like I have, but generally that's where most banks allocate capital. But everyone in this room has a business too, so we're making capital allocation decisions. Even if you don't have a bank, you're allocating capital every day to a source. So this is what I want to spend most of the time on today, is just kind of really understand what every person can do, not because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the moral thing to do, not because it's maybe insulting to some of us that came to this country with a belief that the American dream is widely accessible to everyone, only to find out that, you know, the kids on the school bus that don't look like me ride the school bus a little bit longer than the white kids that drive their cars right next to them, right? So you start to see those disparities. And so I've been really on this journey of trying to figure out, how do we build a movement where intentionally closing those gaps is just good business, and understanding it's good business to invest whatever capital you have available to you, investing it in those that may have been overlooked by your competitor down the street. So if I can have some quick reactions from each of you, you know, what are the types of capital that each of you can allocate? Just what's available to you that you can do to channel that capital into those high potential but underestimated communities? Any thoughts or reactions on that? Grants and equity, financial capital. Intellectual capital. Many of us can mentor. Human capital, absolutely. Time. Any other thoughts? Network, social capital. Right, social capital. So let me start there, social capital. The old saying goes is, you've heard it, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I don't believe that for a second. It's who knows you. That's what matters. I know Jamie Dimon. I've met him several times. He even knows my name. He doesn't know me. Right? There's a power in who knows you. So when you pick up the phone or call someone because you need help, or send an email, they respond to you because they know you. And that's what we can offer to someone. So one of the greatest tips, and as an immigrant coming to America with very little English and no social network and no financial capital, I actually had $500. So my net worth coming here as a 16-year-old with $500, sadly, was probably greater than 50% of Americans, if you look at the net worth of most families even today. But I quickly built social capital. People help me. People lean into me. So I want to take a moment and just pause here. And Tracy, how are we doing on time? We're good. So when was the last time that someone cut you a real break? Just think about it. You don't have to answer it, but when was the last time that someone really moved you along? That someone took a meeting with you even though you didn't mean anything to them. They didn't need to take a meeting. Or someone took a chance. I can tell you in my journey, there are thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of instances where someone gave me a chance. This little immigrant boy in a little rural Arkansas town, living there as an exchange student for 2 or 3 years, someone took a chance on me, right? Someone helped me along the way. That's that. Someone invested in me. So that's the first question I have. Just think about, and I hope you can leave here today, think about when someone caught you a break. Then the next one is, I want to think about, someone said intellectual capital, human capital. So what can we do in this room? We have, less than 60 days left in a year? So what can we do in this room to share some of the, what I sense, and I have the privilege of knowing some of you in this room, is tremendous intellectual capital. What can we do in the next 60 days in sharing our expertise, in sharing our experience, on working with someone that may not have any meaning or purpose for our business? We just do it because we want to see if we can move someone up that ladder a little bit. Any reactions to that?
Well, as with South Carolina, my platform is Empower Youth to Lead Through Mentorship. And I've had several conversations with many of you. And so I think that many of us can go to Mentor's national website and find out a way that we can visit a school or connect with a student through Big Brothers Big Sisters or some other program that's already formalized here in the state of South Carolina. And just give back an hour of your time, maybe share what you do to connect with someone else.
That's great. Any other wonderful examples like that?
I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years, and I see a lot of startups as well getting into this space. So all I can do is I help, like what I've learned along the way, I kind of share it with them so they don't have to go through, or at least learn quicker than I had to on this journey.
I've had that privilege of getting that from someone, and it's transformational. Other collaboration. Say more about that. Give us an example of what that could look like.
So, it's this network called Black Barter that I'm a part of, and it's a lot of startups who come together and collaborate and trade each other's services with one another to build our businesses.
Perfect. That's great. Yes, sir.
Sometimes we don't realize the complexities of our systems, and a part of our mentorship isn't just speaking into their lives, it's sometimes walking them through the systems that are so complex. So if you've ever had to go through any of our government systems to get any type of assistance, it's maddening. And so how do we simplify that system for someone who's already living on the cusp of poverty?
That's a great example, and really multiple forms of capital making it available. Other thoughts on that? Okay, let me go back. I want to take a couple more minutes. Was anyone surprised, or is anyone surprised still, with some of the statistics about economic mobility, income distribution? We hear stories about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I'm always puzzled by the questions I receive. Let me give you the sense of that, the flavor. I had these conversations periodically. Why do we need a mission-driven bank? Why do we need a black bank or Hispanic bank or community development bank? Well, just if you're successful in America, you can get credit anywhere. Just walk in and everyone is going to help you out, because this is America. This is what we do. The other question I get frequently is, well, don't you think it's this racial wealth gap, this problem that we talk about? I mean, look, it's been 400 years. Don't you think it's at this point it should be just kind of water under the bridge, right? So why do we need to be intentional about it? So I get these questions all the time about, well, why do we have that racial wealth gap? And I could go on a whole thesis about why we have the racial wealth gap, because we live it at Optus Bank every day, very intentionally trying to close it. So love to hear your reactions to any of those. Yes?
I hear this kind of feeling of, well, some people just are poor. I mean, some people just aren't as smart. Some people aren't. I think a lot of times we kind of just excuse it, like, well, like we can't envision a world maybe where there aren't, where one, that maybe success is measured in multiple different ways. So that
That's one of my favorite ones. Poverty's always been around. Why are we worried about it? Yeah, yeah, that's a great one. Other reactions? Anything that surprised you? Anything you disagree with?
I think, and I can only speak from the viewpoint of being a white woman, that maybe more people in other privileged positions don't understand that speaking to people in power or people who have financial capital, like say if you're a white man, you're automatically listened to and given a certain level of respect. But when you're in a marginalized space, whether it's gender, race, or sexuality based, there is a level of doubt. And so you have to work double, 10 times, 50 times harder to even have the words coming out of your mouth be accepted. And that's certainly in the banking space, as you mentioned, people going in for loans, and simply the name on the loan is a determination as to whether they're given the loan or not. And I think that, or I wonder if people in more privileged spaces don't realize that happens because they've never encountered it themselves. They just know I checked the boxes for the bank, and so I got what I wanted, and that's how it is for everybody.
That's a fantastic point, and that's why I always love that chart about the wealth gap. There's the racial wealth gap, but there are other gaps. The racial wealth gap is probably most personal to me, but that's the question I always ask: how is it in the greatest, most powerful country in the world that we allow certain group of people that are defined by factors that have nothing to do with their character, their intellect, their drive, their hard work, but we just decide that they're not going to have those advantages that I have, frankly. Yes, sir.
I suspect, I don't have any proof, you guys can probably find it if it's there, that there's a large application of personal responsibility and an assumption that government regulations and rules against historically redlining and things like that would fix all that. And, you know, we have, I don't know, what, 70, 80 years of proof that it doesn't fix all that, right? And I arrived at my libertarian political position not from the beginning, but from watching the abject failure of government to solve problem after problem after problem. And the most profound thing that I could finally come up with that I read, and I did not generate this, is when you want to understand a problem, study who profits from the problem, not who suffers from the problem. And we have offloaded much of our personal responsibility to the homeless, to the undervalued, to the marginalized, to victims of domestic violence, to fixing wealth inequalities, to some nameless, faceless bureaucrat or committee or council, so we don't have to face it, right? Christ called on us to visit the widows and orphans because he knew that if we did, we would care. He didn't say, make sure the government council's got a system set up to take care of what its needs. And we just systematically don't want to deal with it. As Fee pointed out, we don't see it, so it must not exist. But in this current day and age, a gentleman who I'm pretty sure is at this conference has been arrested, threatened with arrest twice, while trying to deposit a check in his checking account at his bank. And twice had the police called. And the bank branch still doesn't know what they did. And it was specifically because he's a minority, because I would
Yep.
posit that no white man or woman in this room has ever had the police call on them when they tried to deposit a check in their bank.
Yeah. Well, we hear the stories of redlinings that we could go on, but that's a great. Yeah, it's we have yeah, and that is one of the greatest challenges that we think we've addressed it. It's been addressed, but we saw couple banks got hit with massive orders just last week for redlining today. So I appreciate you sharing that. Other reactions? Yes.
encouraged for like great risk goes great reward, and then discover well the game to get into the risk is limited. If you already have great reward, you get to get into the game where you don't have as much risk. And I mean, if you're not you can't really take risks unless you're accredited. If
Yeah, and I will validate one of the key points because I learned as an immigrant how liberated I was the first significant chunk of change I had. It empowered me to do things I would never have done. And so that's the unfortunate part. That's why when I first started reading these studies, I sat in a foundation conference when I first read this in 2013. And it resonated with me because that's why that family that owns the house, that has the equity in the house, can provide that. And so how can we allow someone to reach that second and rung on that ladder? So I appreciate what you're sharing. I think that's key.
You're the first one in your family to reach that second rung. The first thing you gotta do is go back and buy the glasses for the right person, the refrigerator for the right. Like yeah, money immediately comes back spending into your family just to help them catch up, just so they're like the highest part of the rung, just below you, that maybe they can go up. It's not if you're at the top, you're not necessarily putting that money back in, because you don't necessarily have.
And that's why. Yep. And that's why this is the case too. I'm just validating everything you're saying with, I mean, look at that growth, right? That's stunning. That's why the top 5% has accelerated so much. Other reactions, anything that you disagree with or anything that you feel like would have been a good thing to include as we think about collective action. Yes, ma'am.
I watched a promo that we've been working on. It's called Diversity at the Dinner Table. And we feel as though it's talked about all over to diversity in the workplace. But that workplace character has to exist in the home. And having these conversations in our pre-show that I've had with people who don't necessarily look like me, what I found is that people who look like me, we're having conversations about hard things at home because we have to. But people who might not necessarily see these harsh realities aren't having these conversations at home. And so it's overlooked. And so I think when we bring these conversations to the dinner table and create a more intimate space around the safety of having these conversations, that this type of change can really have an effect on people in the long run because you're changing the person.
Well, thank you for articulating one of the reasons why I wanted to do this talk. Because to have a white banker talk about these issues, sometimes it's a little more helpful than keeping it just in the back room for the folks that are most impacted by it. Okay, so I know we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to close with a quick story that was so startling to me that I actually shared it. I have the privilege of being in Liberty Fellowship. I know some folks in the conference are Liberty Fellows as well. But prior to our last session, which is part of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, it's an amazing program in South Carolina. Feel very grateful that I was part of it. But I shared this story with our fellows, and so I'm gonna sanitize it a little bit. But I had a privilege to sit in a room in a rural community with 3 gentlemen that I just met. And those 3 gentlemen, I can't name any names because one of them is our customer, but they came to America from a little village in northern India of 700 people. And we were sitting there talking about banking, and the 3 of them, each of them came to America as 17, 18-year-olds. And let's just say I have the privilege of knowing what their personal financial statements look like. And each one of them has a net worth over $1 billion. And one is younger than me, by the way. And I'm not sharing that because of the money. I'm sharing that how they got there. So this is what I wanted to leave with. I was so inspired by this. Is when I was asking their stories, I was learning their story. I said, how did you get from a little village of 700 people in India to America, and in 40 years or less built $1 billion net worth? One of them has $100 million in his checking account, literally $100 million in cash. Yes. So let me give you the details, because this is what I want to leave with today. The way they got there, so he came in, one of them came in, and cousin gave him an opportunity to run a small business, social capital. He knew he had a cousin with a little small business. Another cousin loaned him a few $1,000s to start his next business after he learned from the first business for 3 or 4 years. So financial capital. Then one of his uncles, who was here, a distant uncle, coached him along every venture. And one of those gentlemen today owns over 200 hotels in America. Right? Social capital, financial capital, human capital. How did they get there? That was my question. How? One of them asked me, well, we'd like to do some business with you, and I have this opportunity to look at, can you look at this financial package for me? I said, yeah, well, send me the contracts and agreements. They said, we don't have contracts and agreements. Think about it. So now he loaned $40 million to a cousin with no contract or agreement, just on a handshake. So the reason I'm sharing that is, imagine what this world would look like, what our community in Colombia would look like, if we're able to offer each other social, financial, human capital on a handshake. That's all they started with. And you could say they're self-made. They're not self-made. They had social, financial, human capital. They work hard. They're super bright. But the way they got there is they leveraged those 3 forms of capital on a handshake. And so that's one of my dreams, is as we leave here, as we build these relationships, as we get to know each other better, imagine what this world could look like if we could do deals on a handshake. If we say, I am going to be here for you, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to provide you, and then if you can't deliver, you tell me. Because that's part of the story. As soon as one of those 3 that have been doing business with each other for 40 years gets in trouble, the other 2 come around. And they don't necessarily bail each other out, they help each other out. So I hope that dinner discussion that you referenced, I hope this is a beginning of that dinner discussion too, that we can look beyond what each other looks like, or where we came from, or what net worth we have, or what social impact we could have on each other, and just start building that community that those 3 gentlemen had in that room. And we tried to replicate it here. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share a little bit of my story, and thank you for the amazing contributions that each of you provided.